Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to present to you the author of My Grandmother's Ring, Laurie Bricker.
That's impossible to follow. Allow me to take a few minutes to acknowledge people that are here. I appreciate all of you being here. Mayor Joe, thank you for your leadership, our new friendship, and thank you for all your amazing words. Thank you. To Melissa Williams-Murphy and the incredible team at the Bryan Museum, thank you for hosting us. Thank you for everything you've done. And please, join the Bryan Museum, and please take a tour. It is incredible. I want to take a moment to thank everyone who is a BOI. Raise your hand. BOIs. And everyone who's an IBC, Islanders by Choice. A very special thank you to Beverly Denver, who is the publisher of Houston Woman magazine, but more than that, she is a connector extraordinaire. Thank you, Beverly. To Beverly, Joe, and Melissa, who wrote incredible testimonials in the latest edition of My Grandmother's Ring. To my Delta Phi Epsilon sorority sisters, the quiet ones. To Bo Rawlings, Galveston City Council member. To Annette's gym class and our book club. And especially Marion Cohen, who is in the acknowledgments of my book. She's the one that nudged me every single day. How many chapters have you written? To Kathleen Ownby's book club. Don't see them. There they are. To Susan Harris Hohenbaum, who is a childhood friend, and her book club. To Laura Randall Bacon and Tom, are they here? Don't see them. Jay Guerrero, representing Senator John Cornyn, and our dear friend, Jay and Karen. To, making sure that I'm not forgetting anybody, to all of our friends from Houston, and especially to my family, to Jeff and Stephen and Brandon. Brandon is my oldest grandson. I am his Mimi. I'm going to get emotional now. And a very special two guests, very special. My cousins Liz and Sam Smith from Georgia. They flew in from Georgia. Mimi is their grandmother too. And you all have to meet Liz and Sammy. Thank you, Liz, for your incredible support, for everything you did, everything that you did. Everyone has to meet them. And you have to see her bracelet, but that's later. So, today is Saturday, September the 6th. Our grandmother was 4.5 years old in 1900, and this weekend, this Saturday, although it was on a Monday, September the 8th, but this Saturday, 125 years ago, the blow hit Galveston. And I named the book My Grandmother's Ring because this is a tribute to my grandmother, to her ring, which you will all see, her engagement ring. My grandmother, as Joe said, was the last known survivor of the 1900 storm when she died at 106 and a half. The clarity of her violet eyes reflect the clarity of this ring and is a metaphor for all that she saw, the past, the present, and her vision for the future. She considered her life nothing remarkable, but it was so incredible, all of the things that she did. This is her house, 2012 Broadway, and if you walk outside the Bryan Museum on 21st Street, that way, and look toward Broadway, you can see the lot where her house was. Jeff's grandmother and great-grandparents lived at 2319 Avenue M. So they were 2 blocks down the street. So the legacy continues with our connection to Galveston and to Mimi. Mimi's sitting on the front porch. You'll have to go up afterwards and see her closely. But this is an actual photograph of her house on Broadway. This is Lorraine. The book is written, the beginning of the book is from my point of view. I should stand closer to the microphone. From my point of view, the prologue and the epilogue, but the whole book is written in my grandmother's voice. This is on her 106th birthday. This is an innocent little alley cat that we adopted, Nala. And somehow or another, those of you that know me will not find it hard to believe that I would smuggle Nala into the nursing home at 7 Acres. Fortunately, I knew the CEO of 7 Acres, Malcolm Slako of blessed memory. His wife Leslie is here. And Malcolm called me one day and said, "We heard." And I said, well, you know, and so we agreed, there was a truce, and he said, as long as the cat is vaccinated, and as long as the cat only goes into your grandmother's room. So this cat had a sixth sense. She knew how to comfort my grandmother. And interestingly, my grandmother, who was quite the germaphobe, when they would bring her lunch on a tray, Nala would put her paws up on the tray and eat off of her plate. My grandmother never would have let that happen, never, but she did. And the day that my grandmother died, and the book begins with when she died, the day that my grandmother died, Nala was there, snuggling with her, and I put my grandmother's hand on Nala's fur and said, "Do you feel her soft fur?" I put my grandmother's hand on her nose. I said, "Do you feel her wet nose?" I put my grandmother's hand on her neck, and I said, "Can you feel the purring?" And my grandmother had gone to sleep the night before and never really ever woke up. But for a split second, her expression changed, and I knew that she heard. These are our great-grandparents. They're also BOI. So my grandmother Lorraine was a second-generation BOI, as some of you are. This is Belle Isaacs and her husband Ben Isaacs. Ben was from St. Louis, and Belle was BOI. This is Lorraine as a young child. Her eyes look blue. Obviously, it was watercolored over, black and white picture. But her eyes looked blue there, but they were actually violet. And you could just like see through her eyes and just see how she could envision everything. This is her brother Morty, who was 6 years older. So I would like to read, this is the Great Storm, and this is a picture from the storm. I'd like to read a chapter of the book to you to commemorate the anniversary of the storm. And this is my grandmother's words. 1900, the blow. It was an evening in September 7th, 1900. I was 4.5 years old. It had been a beautiful, almost clear, warm day, but now the sea breeze picked up as the direction of the wind changed abruptly, now coming from the northeast. This always meant a blow was coming. We never called a storm a hurricane. I'm not sure we knew the term hurricane. That evening after supper, my family and friends took chairs out on the front lawn as it was cooler and the full moon seemed to light up the dark night. The island was accustomed to the late summer to early fall seasonal storms. The residents always called them blows, and I knew what it meant to hear, it must be a blow coming. Despite other accounts, we had no warning. I like to say that those who state that meteorologists predicted what was to come was a bunch of hooey. The morning of September 8th was cloudy and a light rain was falling. Mother and I walked down the steps through the back door and across the alleyway behind our home to the neighbor's home. The homes behind our home on Broadway were also typical of the Galveston architecture. 2 stories with several aligned windows, Wooden stairs leading to the first floor and wooden frames were representative of the time. The creaking of each step of the stairs seemed especially loud that morning as I walked up to the Lovenbergs' front porch with Mother. The Lovenbergs were our neighbors and Mother and Father's good friends. Florette, the 22-year-old daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Lovenberg, was very ill. Mother was helping Mrs. Lovenberg pack a trunk so that she and her daughter could travel to New York via train for her medical attention. We spent the day helping them. I remember sitting in the corner of a large room holding my rag doll, Latchy. I recall the darkness in the home. Mother told me I had to be very quiet so as not to disturb Florette. I did peek into her room to see her in the bed. The windows were covered, so all I saw was a very small shadow of a raised portion of the blankets. Even as a young child of 4, I wondered about Florette and why she was so sick. I worried and stewed about her then and for the rest of my life. Early that afternoon, Mother noticed that heavy rain had begun to fall rather steadily. As she looked into the alleyway through the Lovenbergs' upstairs window, she noticed puddles forming and decided we needed to head back home. As we crossed the alleyway, she lifted me over the wide puddles to the other side. We rushed into the house and laughed as we realized we were both soaking wet. Later, we were to discover that the water we saw in the alley was actually salt water that had already begun to come in from the Gulf. A blow was coming. As the afternoon turned to evening, the storms became more violent. I saw the palm trees bending from the strong winds and the magnolia trees, always draping their pungent flowers, now bent over, touching their fragile blossoms to the ground. I imagined the tide must be very strong in the Gulf. The lightning was frequent and seared across the Gulf sky, followed by drum booms of thunder. Our front yard was sprinkled with oleander bushes. Oleanders, I was told, were poisonous, so we always thought it naughty to pick a leaf and smell the sour smell. This afternoon, the oleanders bent and tossed in the wind, and I saw their pale pink and white blossoms fluttering violently. Lightning and thunder became more frequent by late evening, and we moved quickly away from the windows. Mother picked me up and held me in her lap as Father paced the floors from room to room as if on patrol. By nightfall, the 4 of us were huddled together in the dining room. We had shutters on the windows, and we closed everything up while Father stood with a hatchet in his hand in case the water got high enough that he would need to chop a hole in the floor to let water into the house, preventing it from being lifted right up off the foundation. I was sitting on Mother's lap while Morty dozed in a chair. My father paced the floor all night, checking for leaks and damage, then walked upstairs late in the night. For some reason, I followed. The night was so dark and so loud, it felt as though everything was making its loudest noises, from the rain on the roof to the wind in the trees, from the thunder booming seemingly constantly, to the creaks of the floorboards as my father paced. Father used a walking stick. Nowadays, it would be called a cane. However, this was specifically used for status then, certainly not because he needed a cane. His steps were that of a march, with the noise of the cane tapping down firmly on the floor, sometimes on the area rugs, but mostly on the hardwood floor. Up the stairs he went with a 3-beat march, a footstep, the walking stick, and the other footstep. At that point, I was petrified. I watched as Father slowly looked around the room. He held a candle in its holder, so the shadows of my father, me, and goodness knows what else moved across the walls as we moved. Father noticed a rather large bulge in the pastel wallpaper bubbling up from the upstairs ceiling. I looked up to see what caught his gaze, when suddenly he forcefully poked his walking stick into the ceiling, and water the color of beer gushed out to the floor. I wanted to shriek, but Father would be so disappointed in me. So I sucked in a deep breath and held it for what seemed like an eternity. Father looked down at me, and without a sound, he walked back down the stairs. I never ever was to forget that frightening scene. I recall it now. Shortly after midnight, the stained glass transom over the front door crashed in, and Father nailed up a rug over the shattered window. Mother, Morty, Father, and I spent the rest of the night in the dining room. We tried to sleep, but the mysterious noises interrupted us constantly. I looked up from Mother's secure lap often to see Father, as he seemed to be on alert throughout the night. Morning came, and though I suppose I was too young to absorb the comprehensive damage, I was told later that the island was devastated. Over 8,000 lives were lost. I do remember hearing the story told over and over about the children in the orphanage. The nuns used rope to tie them in a row so that they could stay together as they fled the destruction of their home. All of them drowned. I don't suppose I ever saw photos of them, but my mind pictured the scene all the days of my life. We were lucky. Our home, though no different than anyone else's on Broadway, had little damage. I suppose, as we were told, that is because the location of our home was in the middle of the island and the middle of Broadway at a higher elevation. Our home survived, and more importantly, we survived. I couldn't possibly imagine that 100 years later, I would be considered the last survivor of the 1900 storm. So this storm is still known as the greatest, most destructive natural disaster in the history of our country. So this is, I mentioned Florette, the little girl that was 22 years old that was so ill. She died not because of the storm, but because she couldn't get to New York for treatment. My cousin Liz is wearing the bracelet, and everyone has to see the bracelet. It's over 125 years old. So shortly after, the leadership of the city of Galveston were wise enough to know that they needed to build a seawall. My grandmother remembered all of the days of her life, the sucking in of the water and the blowing out of the sand as they raised the island and built the seawall. This is my grandmother at a young age. They took these very serious poses. You know, back in the day, you didn't smile in a picture. But this is her probably around 13 or 14 years old. So on the left is the original Ball High School. And my grandmother ran for president of her senior class against 4 boys in 1912. Women's suffrage was 1920. And she beat them. Dr. Kay Stripling, former superintendent of HISD, that's where I got it, if you're wondering. On the right is really something incredible. This is a dance card. So the metaphor is, if you were to ask me to go to lunch with you and I say, well, let me check my dance card, or let me pencil you in, that's where the expression came from. And this is in honor of the officers of the USS Texas, 1914, at the Hotel Galvez. And as you can see, her dance card is full. This is my grandmother. This was written up in the Galveston Daily News. Lorraine Isaacs, now Mrs. Sigmar Hofeller of Galveston. She was class president, and those who graduated with her this year, in this year of 1913, declared she was the most popular person in the class.
That's great.
So during World War I, Morty, my grandmother's brother, was stationed in Fort Worth. And my grandmother and her parents went to Fort Worth on a train to see Morty. And they were sitting in the lobby of a hotel, and Morty was visiting with them, and they said, "Who is that amazing young soldier playing the piano in the lobby?" And Morty jumped up and ran over and grabbed Sigmar, who was also a young soldier, and the rest is history. But what happened was he started coming down to Galveston, as my grandmother would say. He would come visit in Galveston, and in the back of my book, I have a whole list of her expressions. One of her expressions, when my grandfather would come to visit, this was before they were married, he would say, "Every chicken in its own nest." So the telegrams that he began sending to her from Buffalo, he was from Buffalo, New York, he began sending telegrams that would say, sincerely, yours truly, and then all my love, and then he mailed the ring from Buffalo, New York, and said, I hope you like it. So there was never a doubt in my mind that I would name the book My Grandmother's Ring, because the comparison, the clarity of the ring, the diamond, and her eyes, and the way that she was about her entire life. Every time she looked at her ring, she thought of all of her memories that came flooding back to her, and she remembered everything. She never forgot anything. She had a second grade teacher at the K school that told her that your memories are like cabinets in your mind, and if you want to remember something, you unlock the cabinet and you look in and the memories come flooding back to her. And so this ring reminds me of her every time I wear it. So my grandfather's family was, they formed a company called Crescent City Concrete. Well, if you're thinking Buffalo, New York, Crescent City is New Orleans. So my great-grandfather had gone to New Orleans for a convention, and he met my great-grandmother, and so he named his company Crescent City Concrete. And if you're ever in Buffalo and you look down on the concrete of all the sidewalks in Buffalo, there are over 350 crescents from his company. They also partnered with Roebling to build the Brooklyn Bridge and the Peace Bridge. Wow. So this is my grandfather, Sigmar, my grandmother, Lorraine, Liz's mother, Marion, my Aunt Marion, and my mother, Elaine. They were at a convention. And my grandfather was a professional magician. So if you look on the card that I made, the little bookmark, it says, capture the magic of your memories. Liz and I had the best birthday parties. If you were invited to our birthday parties, you would see doves, snakes, rabbits appear and disappear. You would see broken chains put back together. You would see long scarves coming out of his sleeve. We had the best birthday parties. My grandfather was also in the insurance business. That's where he made money. This is for fun. But they went to magicians' conventions all over the country. And he was part of the International Brotherhood of Magicians. And when he died, I'm told, I had the chicken pox, so I couldn't go to his funeral. But when he died, he had a magician's funeral. And they broke the magic wand and symbolized the end of his life into the next life. So these are the descendants of my grandmother. On either side of my grandmother, in the center of the picture, it might be a little hard to see, are Liz's mother and my mother, and then on either side, my father and Liz's father, Uncle Eli, and then my husband Jeff, and I can't see who else, and all of the grandchildren, and then all of the great-grandchildren on the front row. Stephen's in the middle with the red sweater, and he's right there. And then these are the great-grandchildren of my grandmother, of Mimi, and Stephen is, where's Stephen? Oh, he's on the top left, and Liz's son is Ethan on the bottom right, Liz and Sammy's son. Okay. This is the day of the storm, 100 years later, September the 8th. Is the volume turned up? Oh, hopefully. Okay, listen carefully.
They were scared to death, especially my father. And he walked around with a hatchet in his hand because he was going to thought he might have to poke a hole in the floor.
Were you frightened of hurricanes after the 1900s?
I've been frightened of hurricanes all my life, ever since I remembered any of it. I remember enough that I was scared to death. And I've always been scared. I'm still scared to this minute. Every time it thunders and lightnings, I'm not scared of thunder and lightning, but I'm scared of storms.
Wow.
So on the right, I'll start with the right. When the Houston Chronicle came to interview my grandmother, everyone that interviewed her that weekend started with the same thing. She was 104, and they started with the same, 104 and a half. They started with the same thing. They said, "What happened?" And so Mimi said, "What do you mean what happened? All hell broke loose." And so I said, that will be the caption. And then on the left, this is CNN, ABC, NBC, CBS. They all came to interview her. And this was their syndicate, not just local. And they all had to set up differently. They all took down the curtains and put up their curtains. They all took down the microphones and the speakers and put up theirs. They all did their camera equipment, their lighting. And so Mimi just sat there very patiently waiting. But every one of them would walk in and say, "What happened?" So finally, when the last reporter that you saw, right before he walked into her room, I said, "Look, ask her what happened the night before the storm. Ask her what the weather was like. Ask her what you did the day of the storm. Ask her what damage was done. Don't just say what happened." So he went in and obediently asked her all those questions. And so when he said what damage was done, Mimi said, "The transom blew in." Blank stare. And she said, "Do you not know what a transom is?" So she explained to him what a transom, the stained glass above the door. And then she said, "My father, we went by dray, and then from Dickinson we took the ship or the boat, and then we went by train to Houston the day after, a couple days after." And again, a blank stare. She goes, "You don't know what a dray is either, do you?" So she explained, and then she said, "My father stayed behind in case there were looters." I always thought that was interesting. In 1900, they used that term, looters. And then she looked at him and she said, "Do you know what a looter is?" He said, "Yes, ma'am." But what was funny was that night, Jeff's mother, who watched CNN all the time, called and said, "Oh my God, they sent the chief meteorologist from Atlanta to interview her." And I thought, oh my God, I treated him like he was an idiot. So this is the key to the city that Mayor Joe referenced. Bo Quiroga came up one day. I had met him at a conference, I guess when I was on the school board. He was mayor. And I told him about my grandmother, and he said, "I would love to meet her." So he came and he stayed like all afternoon. It was amazing. And he gave her the key to the city. And she was so touched, and she kept it on her dresser until she moved into the nursing home and gave it to me. The right hand, so right when my superintendent before Dr. Stripling became superintendent, Rod Page, was selected to become Secretary of Education. And right before the swearing in, President-elect George W. Bush came to Houston. And I was locked in a very small room with Rod Page, who was in a corner practicing his speech, Secret Service men in that corner, and the only other person besides the President-elect was one of my colleagues who touted himself as the ultimate Republican. But he was so starstruck that he stood there with his mouth open and didn't say a word. So, of course, I jumped in. So I told the President-elect, I said, "My grandmother was president of her senior class in 1912. She beat 4 boys before women's suffrage, and she's been voting ever since 1920, and she voted for you." And I said, she called me into her nursing home and said, "I've been voting since 1920. What in the hell is a Chad?" So he died laughing, and he asked for the Secret Service men to bring over a card that says President-elect George W. Bush. And he said, "What day is it?" I said, "You're being sworn in as President of the United States next week." He goes, "I don't even know what month it is." And so he signed her card, and she kept that, and of course it's now mine. Oh, and then I said, of course I had to say more, right? So I said, "Oh, and my cousins, Liz and Sammy, live in Broward County, and they voted for you, and they put you over the top." And he said, tell him next time to do it sooner. So this is my grandmother before she died. She was at 7 Acres, and she befriended this young immigrant, William Conte. He was from Sierra Leone, war-ravaged country, and he had gotten the lottery to be able to come into this country with his wife. And he was studying to get his college degree, as was his wife. And ironically, that was the only person that Mimi would let touch her. And she absolutely adored William. And he would come into her nursing home room, and he'd bring his books and his lunch, and he'd sit and have lunch with her and ask her all of the stories that she could tell. And he would send me all these stories. He wrote them on a napkin, he wrote them everywhere, and he would send me all the stories. William got his citizenship, and he and his family, he has 4 daughters, they all are in college. One's in the military, 3 are in college. And I'll always be grateful to William for what he did for our Mimi and for what our country did for him. So Mimi died at 106 and a half, and she made all the different newspapers you can imagine. And Liz and I were very, very sad, but we were also mad because we thought she would live forever. And, you know, we thought she'd always be the one to cut our hair, hem our dresses, make rice pudding. We always thought that she'd be there forever. And luckily, our children and her children, her grandchildren, and her great-grandchildren all got to know her as adults, when they were adults. So this is the cemetery right down the street on Broadway. It's the Reformed Jewish Cemetery. And this is my great-grandparents, and it's Brandon's great-great-great-great-grandparents, Henrietta and Meyer Schramm. They were from Alsace-Lorraine, and Jeff and I had the opportunity to go there, and I traced our family all the way back. And we went to a little town called Haguenau in France. It's been German and French, but it was French. And we went to the cemetery, and they unlocked the gate, and when we walked in, we saw the Schramm name. And this was another 3 generations more. So I did something highly illegal. I took sand and seashells from Galveston, and I sprinkled them on the graves. And I took rocks and dirt from Haguenau, France, and sprinkled it on the graves here in Galveston. I probably caused the pandemic. These are my great-grandparents, Ben and Belle Isaacs, who lived 2012 Broadway, and Morty. And Ben Isaacs and his brother Jack married Belle Isaacs and her sister Teenie. So brothers married sisters, and they were always together on the island. And this is where Mimi is buried. My grandparents, Lorraine Isaacs Hofeller, and it says last survivor, 1900 storm. And my grandfather right next to Ben and Belle and Morty. We visit the cemetery on Broadway to remember Mimi Gompy, her parents, Belle and Ben Isaacs, her grandparents, Henrietta and Meyer Schramm, as well as dear aunts and uncles. I smile as I watch Mimi's great-grandchildren and their spouses, and Mimi's great-great-grandchildren walk slowly through the cemetery as I am the one to now tell the stories of the past to them. They take in the tales as I speak, and I ask them to always remember. As seasons change, I particularly love the tall wildflowers that spring up throughout the cemetery. Small yellow blossoms bend in the soft Galveston breezes. And now it is my role to stew over the weather, particularly the blows in the Gulf. I watch every weather app vigilantly, and I'm now the weather watchdog of the family. I wear the ring with so much pride. I look at my hand and I see her hand. I wear the ring for every special occasion and certainly whenever I attend religious services. I think of her as I pray that my children and grandchildren will remember me as I remember my Mimi. Mimi taught us all to remember. Mimi always said, "I shall never forget." And Mimi, nor shall we.